Hi, I'm Stephen J. Abramson. Today I have the great pleasure of interviewing the multi-talented and, dare I say, multi-dimensional Nichelle Nichols. And this is for the Archive of American Television. Today is October 13th, 2010, and we are at the TV Academy in North Hollywood, California.
I'm Nichelle Nichols, and I'm very honored to be here. And I approve of this message. It's a name that I really loved because it has grace. Everybody called me Gracie in grammar school. I hated being called Gracie. So when I was 13, 14, I went to my mother and I said, "Who named me Grace?" And she said, "Your father. You were named after your maybe great aunt, Graciela from Spain." I said, "Then why didn't you name me Graciela?" She said, "Why don't you like Grace?" I told her, "Because I keep getting called Gracie." And she said, "Well, you'd have been called Grazie then." So I said, "Rename me." And she said, "I always wanted to name you Michelle or something else." And she said, "But I'll think of something. Maybe you should have the same initials, like Marilyn Monroe." I used to like Marilyn Monroe. She said, tease me. And I said, "Then I like Michelle. Why don't you just name me Nichelle?" And laughed. And she said, "I like Nichelle. That's your name." I said, "Mom, nobody will be able to pronounce it. They'll keep changing it." She says, "Tough. You wanted me to rename you. That's who you are." So my mom renamed me Nichelle when I was 14, I think, just barely 14.
So when you were born, you were Grace Nichols. Did you have a middle name?
I don't want to tell you that. I hate it. Now everybody's going to run and find my birth certificate and find out my middle name was Dell. I hate it. So if you call me that, I will not give you an interview. I will not give you an autographed picture. I will not speak to you. So there. Okay.
So when were you born and where were you born?
Chicago, Illinois. No, I grew up in Chicago. That's my hometown. I was born in Robbins, Illinois, where my father was raised, where my father became first magistrate and then mayor of the town. He brought the water in to Robbins. But I never thought of myself from Robbins because we left Robbins when I was about 15 months. So I remember things about it, like I remember my patent leather slippers. I remember looking down. I remember what I saw. I remember frilly little apricot silk dress because I remember looking down and seeing it. And I remember my little socks and black patent leather slippers and white patent leather slippers. I was a very spoiled child by my mother and father with great love. They thought I was really smart, and I believed them.
So when were you born?
9 months after my mother was pregnant.
That's a good answer. And what was your father's name?
Samuel Earl Nichols. My mother's name was Lisha Nichols, Lishia.
What did your dad do besides being mayor? Did he have another job?
He was a chemist.
Okay.
He went to Howard University. He was a chemist, and he worked for a Hydrox chemical company, and he developed something while he was there called peroxide.
And your mother, did she have a job too, or was her job full-time at home?
Her job became full-time. My mother was, when she was in school, declared a young genius. She went through school so quickly. Came from very poor background, but had this wonderful mind. And she planned to have a career in law. She had a photographic memory. She spoke Latin, and she had a wonderful education, you know. And every once in a while she'd break out in Latin and conversationally. I had so much respect for both my mother and father, and both had such respect for one another, that I grew up with great expectations. That I grew up believing that I could become anything that I wanted to be. And here I am. I'm exactly what I wanted to be.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Let me count the ways. I had when my mother and father married, my father had 3 daughters by previous marriage, Ruth, Olga, Billy, or Thelma, who was nicknamed Billy, and my mother had 1 son, Eric Vaughn, which is interesting because his name was Bolton. So his name was Eric von Bolton. When he went into the Army, which was still somewhat of a segregated army, they couldn't find him. He was in an all-white troop. And they kept saying Von Bolton, and he kept saying here, and they kept trying to figure out who this tall, very dark black man was. And instead of just asking him who he was, they tried to figure it out by themselves. It took them about 6 months. So, and of course, he knew what was going on, but they never asked for Bolton. So that's, I guess you know that by now we have a wicked sense of humor in my family. Then my parents had together 2 sons, then me, had 6 children, 3 girls, 3 boys.
So what were you interested in when you were growing up?
I guess I'd better name my brothers and sisters before they see this and say, how come Ruth, Olga, and Billy got a name? Samuel Earl Jr., Frank Aaron, Nichelle Nichols, that's me, Marion Anderson Nichols, Thomas Nichols, his middle name, and Diane Gillespie Nichols.
So when you were growing up, what were you interested in?
Exactly what I'm doing now. I was interested in ballet. By the time I was 12 years old, a ballet master from Russia said I was ready for any cours de ballet in the country, in the world. I was that good. I was on point. I loved it. I was dedicated to it until I found there were other forms of dance, modern, Afro-Cuban. I wasn't very good at tap. You know, everyone took ballet acrobats and tap. Because I was so limber, I was pretty good at acrobats, but I wasn't really wanting to do that. But ballet consumed me from about 9 years old until I discovered at 14, 15 other forms of dance, and I was determined to master them and became professional in those. At the same time, I grew up in musical theater, so dance was now just a component of singing, dancing, acting, and I discovered that I had this very strange voice. To me, it was strange because I could sing high soprano, and I had this nice low voice, and I could sing down here moaning low. So to me, until I found Professor Gerald Hall was one in New York, and then Balestrieri, Giuseppe Balestrieri, about a 4'5", if that tall, Italian man, who I went to have out here in California, And I told him I had this weird voice in which I had two voices. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And so I sang my high voice, summertime. And then I sang like sultry voices, songs. And I loved musical theater. So I loved doing everything. I got to sing everybody. And so he said, "And so what do you have?" And I said, "I have two voices." And he laughed so hard he fell off the piano stool. And he says, "Well, we're going to bring those two voices together." So now I have one voice. However, at that time, some years ago, by the time he brought it together, I discovered that instead of two voices, I had 3.5 octave range. Or actually, it was a 4.5 octave range. It is now a 3.5 octave range. Years take their toll on you in one way or another. I think that's the universe's way of getting back at you or something.
While you were studying dance and you were still a teenager, were you performing publicly?
Yes. I had my first professional job when I was 14 years old in Chicago at the downtown at the Sherman House. It was called they had a wonderful, famous restaurant at the Sherman House called the College Inn, and which dated back to the 20s, when all of the great talent came. They played the Sherman House, and lavish shows. And it was the first major house in theater and in clubs, nightclubs, that had the major black entertainers who came as also, like Duke Ellington and Lena Horne and whom else did they have? Oh, the Dunham Dancers. Well, we were portraying, this was called the College Inn Story, and we were portraying Catherine Dunham and her Barefoot Dancers, or Catherine Dunham and her dancers, because she was known for barefoot, for Afro-Cuban. We did one major dance as an Afro-Cuban. Then, because they had a sense of humor, our second dance was an Apache dance in high heels. So which she did, she brought from Europe with her. So we portrayed her. Our show was so successful that we went in for 6 weeks. We stayed for a year. The show just kept going and kept going. It was the only house. Ernie Byfield owned the Sherman House. It was the only house of hotel that allowed of fine hotels that allowed black people to come and stay and with respect. It seems rather strange when I say that many times to young people who look at me from the audience like, "What is she talking about?" You know. But there was a time, and I remember that time because I was a victim of it. I would be playing years later, a major room or theater, and couldn't stay in the hotel, except for Ernie Byfield. All the way back, if you worked in his hotel, you had a suite in his hotel.
Was this in Chicago?
This was Chicago, good old Chicago. People lived on one side of the town, other people lived on another side of the town. Now people live where people live together.
Where did you go to high school?
Englewood High. By the time I was, again, 14, probably long before that, but I remember in high school saying, I am leaving Chicago as soon as I have the right and can. And so I did. Because of the weather. I hated the slush and snow. I loved the first 2 days of snow. It was the winter wonderland. And we were only 3.5 blocks from my school, Betsy Ross, where was my grammar school. And I loved school, but I hated getting there. I also didn't like all those clothes that you had to wear. So I used to sneak out cute clothes after I got to school. And I'd go in the bathroom, the girls' bathroom, and change clothes so I didn't have all those sweaters and things and so forth like that. And one day I forgot to wear my boots, my slush boots, home. And I came home. By the time I realized it, I was soaking wet. And I went back to the school to get my slush boots, and the school was closed. And now the cat was out of the bag. Mother said, I knew you did it all the time. You weren't fooling anybody. But my mother was psychic. And so and she actually had eyes in the back of her head. She knew what you were doing.
Did you basically bypass college and go right into show business?
I never, yes, yeah. I knew that I was leaving Chicago in the winter. It's slushy, terrible snow. In the spring, it rained, which made a beautiful summer, which was hot. And the only season to this day that I enjoy in Chicago is fall. It has all of the best of everything. It's gorgeous.
Do you remember the first time you saw television?
Yes.
What do you remember about that, or what maybe were your favorite shows?
The grid, the
Test pattern? The test pattern?
Yeah, the test patterns. Yes, we were little kids, and they brought a TV into the show, and we sat there and just looked at the test patterns. And every once in a while, something would happen. A program would come on, and you go, oh look, oh went the sound, and then they had the rabbit ears and everything. The kids today don't know what you're talking about. I think we should have a museum so that they could go and see, oh my goodness, is this what Grandma went through?
Did you have any favorite shows?
Oh, yes. They were mostly, you had the comedy shows, and then later you had the dramas. The comedy shows were like, who were they? The Sid Caesar and those guys. They were so funny. I don't find the humor today that I enjoyed as a child on television, or any. Some of them are very, very clever, But on the whole, humor has become juvenile. So the best comedians have kind of left it and gone into developing their own comedies but those are become movies and so forth. But the run of the mill, there's a comedy station called Comedy on my it's 141 that has some pretty good comedians on it, and I'll watch that for humor. But by and large, a lot of the humor is geared towards young people, and it doesn't. I go like that.
Yeah.
But they're still good writers. And most of those get in movies, I think, the good humor.
Were you aware of how African Americans were portrayed in television in the early days?
There were none, except for domestics. And the first time I saw someone that looked and acted like me was Nat King Cole had his show, and it had dignity. And I remember a young girl, actress from Europe, Petula Clark. She was a guest on his show, and she came up and kissed him on the cheek. And which I had by this time been to Europe, and one did that, and I was that way where we lived, and they had a fit. The world has stopped. So I knew that there was a difference. And
Petula Clark was on the Harry Belafonte
yes,
show, right?
on the Harry Belafonte show, but on Nat King Cole's show when she was one of his guests. I believe it was Petula Clark. But she came up and she kissed him on the cheek and said, "Thank you so much." And the next thing you know, everybody was talking about it. I went, "My God." And those were the days. I mean, that seems funny now, but and silly now. But
were some of the comedy shows in the 50s with black actors like Amos and Andy and Beulah, how did you react to those? Were they funny? Were they offensive?
I guess the Amos and Andy show was the only show that I ever saw that I laughed at, when they had black actors, and whether maybe I didn't know any better because I was still so young. But the humor was funny. I remember asking my parents, why don't they talk correctly? Why don't they speak right? Because what they were doing was very, very funny. But they just didn't speak right. I didn't know anybody who spoke like that. And I lived in an all-black neighborhood.
How did you come to, did you move to New York and then to Los Angeles?
I never actually moved to New York.
Okay.
I lived in New York for a number of years, but I didn't think of myself as a New Yorker, but I loved everything there was about New York.
So what brought you to Los Angeles?
Well, let's say what brought me to New York was I was starring in a show called Kicks and Company, opposite Burgess Meredith, written by Oscar Brown Jr., the late, great songwriter, Oscar Brown Jr. And it was a wonderful show. Didn't make it on Broadway, but we actually opened. We rehearsed in New York and opened in Chicago. And by that time, the show was so changed and all the beauty was drained from it. And it didn't make it in Chicago or New York. They tried to go back and open it in Chicago. It did not open. I did not go back to New York with it. But somehow I had gotten such good reviews. And that was the first time that I realized I was being noticed for myself. And so I opened the Playboy Club in New York. And Diane Carroll was on Broadway in No Strings. And I opened in the Playboy Club. Grand. It was a fantastic, beautiful club. And I got an agent. I think my agent called me and said they wanted me to come, and they were going to do a second company of No Strings. Also, they were looking for not a stand-in for Diane. She had been in and out of the show quite a bit. And so I went and got it. And I did stand by to Diane Carroll while I performed, and it was the first time anyone had done that. They allowed me to star in the Playboy Club and to come and just check in until half hour. If Diane showed up, I was free to go and star. And the Richard Rodgers and Playboy.
Hugh Hefner?
Hugh Hefner came together and agreed on that. And it was the first time I understood, or was told, that two great producers agreed on that. So I was standby to her for the 6 weeks that I was at the Playboy Clubs.
So as an understudy, you had to learn her entire part, right?
Yes,
Okay.
but she had an understudy. I was not an understudy. It's a different thing. An understudy is like in the show. She was shorter than Diane, and so somehow they wanted someone with a name, and I now had some notoriety, you know. And yes, I not only learned it and rehearsed it, but in the Loads of Lovely Love, just some money, and then some money, and the loads of lovely love. The choreographer, the director was also a choreographer. He got so excited because I could dance. He created a dance for me. Diane said to me one night, she says, I understand you're learning a dance for this and I said, yes, Diane. We had done Porgy and Bess, the movie, together. I was a lowly, one of the dancers and singers of the chorus, and she was one of the stars of the show. But that was not long ago from the part I'm telling you about. And so she saw me that after she came in a little early, and she said, I understand you have said, I think that's delightful, but I have no intentions of being late or absent while you're here, Nichelle Nichols. And I said, okay, Diane, and I laughed. And I said, but I have a bag of banana peelings for you. And she said, banana peelings for what? And I said, break a leg. I was so naughty. She laughed, I laughed, and she was never late for the 6 weeks that I was there, at least.
So did Porgy and Bess bring you to Los Angeles, or what caused you to move out to L.A.?
From there I was booked, not in L.A., I was booked in Hawaii, as I recall, and I was also booked up as a singer, actually as a singer, and I put the dance in with it, up the Pacific Northwest and across Canada, back across Canada and down the Pacific Northwest. And my parents had always dreamed, and I had always dreamed, of moving to what we called beautiful, sunny California, especially Los Angeles. And I had a principal who moved to the San Fernando Valley. And it sounded so romantic that I decided that's where I was going to live. Now I'd asked if I would like to come and star in a big show in Hawaii. And I absolutely. But it wasn't going to be for another 2 weeks. And I had an aunt who lived in California, and I decided to go and I called her and see if I could come and stay with her. And I knew my parents wanted to move out. And so I came and stayed with my aunt and her husband, and she took me all over, and I found this huge... I found that people in California had apartments around swimming pools. Can you imagine? I mean, in swimming pools all year long. I could not believe it. And so I found this huge apartment in Los Angeles. And my aunt took me to see what L.A. had to offer. And I put money down on the apartment and then called my parents and said, you have an apartment in Los Angeles. It's due in another month for you. And they actually closed up their, they had a knickknack store. they closed everything down, sold everything, and moved out to Los Angeles. They could not believe it. And it took me years before I realized what I had done, you know. And I didn't really move to Los Angeles because I kept working and moving around, so much as now my son, my little 8-year-old son, is going to grow up in Los Angeles, not in that cold, weird place called, I think he was 5 or 6 when he moved out. And when they moved out and brought my son, and it was delightful. It was delightful. I fell in love with this place. And then I said, I want to see where is San Fernando Valley. He says, oh, nobody lives in the valley, in San Fernando Valley. And all the important people. You live in Hollywood and Beverly Hills and so forth, and Truesdale, you know. And I said, but I want to see the San Fernando Valley. He took me to see the San Fernando Valley. By this time, I said, I found out that the Jackson 5 lived in the San Fernando Valley. The San Fernando Valley was gorgeous. Eartha Kitt lived, not Eartha Kitt, Aretha Franklin had a home out here, and other people lived out here. Bob Hope bought hundreds of acres out here, and people like that. And I learned the history of it. And not then. I lived then I'm in Los Angeles. And when I moved here, and then in Beverly Hills, in the hills of Beverly, and then I got an opportunity to find a place in the valley, and where I am now. I've lived there for 31 years, and I love it and adore it.
And we're sitting in the valley right now.
And we're in the valley right now.
Early in your career, you worked with an incredible array of music and theater legends. Let me just give you some of the names, and if you could, almost like word association,
Yes.
just a brief
Yes.
comment or thought about some of these people. Catherine Dunham.
Yes. When I was a kid, she came through town and she auditioned different people, dancers, and she chose me, and my mother and father would not let me go. I was too young. I had just come out of the big show that I told you. I was 14. I was now 15. And Mother said, not without a chaperone. You're not going anywhere. And I was devastated. And another young girl got the part, and we were good friends, but we were rivals from rival dance companies, studios where we studied as kids, and it broke my heart. But there was more out there for me.
Duke Ellington.
The same show that I'm telling you, and Mr. Ellington came through. He was performing at the Chicago Theater, and he was living at the hotel, and he came to see the show that everyone was talking about. After the show, and I had a suite in the hotel, except I was so young I had to have a chaperone, which was either my mother or father or both. And we used to come down and stay for the weekend, my mother, my mom and dad and I. And he asked to meet me. And waiter brought up to our suite and said, Mr. Ellington is very excited about your daughter's work and would like to meet her. And Mother said, well, you tell Mr. Ellington that she will come down and meet him with her mother and with the troupe that she dances with, that she performs with. And Mr. Ellington said he thought that was great, and brought over the entire troupe. And we were sitting there talking, and he said, you're going to be a singer. And after saying how great we were, and wonderful, and I said, how do you know I sing? Well, we've opened the show with everybody, the whole cast of 30, with an opening number, and we closed it with a closing number. With a closing number. And so I said, how do you know? And he said, I could hear you sing. I could hear your voice over everybody on that stage. I don't know if that made me sensitive to it, to blend in, or that I stood out was good. A year and a half later, he came back to Chicago and asked the publicist to find me. He wanted me to create a choreograph and perform a ballet to one of his suites, that monologue, duet, and threesome. And I was in the threesome, so I got two guys, and we did this fantastic ballet. And every night I used to go stand in the curtain, because she sang just before I went on, and watch this tall, willowy gal who is the band singer sing, and the way she wrapped herself around the microphone, and I was just in awe. Toward the end of the tour, which was about 3 months, I think we were in Omaha maybe, or some place like that, Mr. Ellington called me to his dressing room. This was in a theater, okay, and in between the movies, great bands came and performers came and sang, in between. And so he says, he called me to his dressing room and he said, sing something for me. And I looked at him and I said, sing what? And he said, well, you can sing, can't you? Well, I'm now 16, and I said, or 17, I think. I was thinking it was 17. My mother couldn't keep me back. And I said, he says, well, you can sing, can't you? I know you can sing. And so I said, well, sure, we all got rhythm, ain't we? And he said, fine, sing. And I said, well, I thought he's going to take me out on the stage and play for me. And I said, well, there's no piano here. And he said, you don't need a piano. We all got rhythm, ain't we? And I was challenged. And so I decided to sing every song that the singer sang. And he said, fine. When I sang about the fifth one, he said, fine, those are the ones you're going to sing. If you still got that, those are great. And he said, you've still got that little gold dress that you wore when we left, before we left? And I said, oh, yes, I've even got the gold shoes. I thought we were so close to wrapping, to returning to the end of the thing, that he's going to give a party and I'll get to sing. He said, great, wear them. He said, do you have them with you? And I said, sure. And he said, great, you go on tonight. I said, do what? And he says, the singer is sick. She had to leave the band. She's not going to finish the tour. You are. I've never been so scared in my life, but I was determined to never show it. And so I went on, and I would get wonderful applause, but I noticed that the band was kind of going, and Duke Ellington is actually playing piano for me. His back is kind of sideways to the audience, and he tried not to show it. He finally comes to me, he said, what are you doing with that microphone? And I said, I'm singing. He said, the last gal who did that was twice as tall as you. She was 10 times as nervous as you, and the only reason she hung onto that mic is because she would have fallen down. He says, you don't need to hug the mic and do all of those gyrations. You've got a voice. Now just sing, do your thing. And that's when I first learned not to be like anybody else. Try to be like anybody else, to be yourself. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened. And that was that. And right after I left there, I found out I was pregnant with my husband, who was one of the dancers. and so we finished on a high note, and I came home to Chicago, still living in Chicago, and had this miracle child named Kyle Johnson, who grew up incidentally to and when he was 14 was cast. He grew up to 8 years old and got everything he went up for. I'm not sure I ever forgave him. Nobody goes in and just gets anything that, he was a child actor. And that lasted until he was about 15, and he didn't want to do that anymore, particularly. He found music and rock and roll and the Beatles by then. But he was also discovered by the great photographer Gordon Parks, and who went into the movie business and produced wonderful movies. And he did the life story of Gordon Parks in The Learning Tree. So that's one of my old prides and joy.
Do you have a brief memory of Sammy Davis Jr.?
I performed with Sammy in the same length that Diane was in Porgy and Bess. That's where I met him. That's where I met not Eartha Kitt, Pearl Bailey. And both asked at the end of it. We had a long run of making that movie. I thought it was a career. And it was through that movie that I joined SAG and never looked back. Some wonderful things came out of connections came out of that. He wanted to take me on tour with him, and so did Pearl Bailey, because when the show closed, they both went to Las Vegas, and I turned them both down. And by that time, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a soloist. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be recognized as a singer. I wanted to star in Broadway. And that's what I geared myself for. And Pearl Bailey was so wonderful about it. Sammy was not thrilled, but we remained friends for the rest of his life. But Pearl Bailey, I thought, was going to be very angry with me. And because I had kind of come to rehearsal, and after the first day of rehearsal, I asked to speak to her privately, and I told her what I wanted to do, and that I was not going with Sammy or her, and would she forgive me? And she said, "Darling, that's the way to do it. Do it privately with respect for people. I love you. I want you to have a great success, and anything I could ever do for you, darling, I'll do it. I just love the way you act. You're special to me." And she remained my friend for the rest of her life, and I learned much from her, and I loved her dearly.
And great impression of Pearl Bailey, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I do her, and I do about 11 other black women in the business. I turned it years later, into a one-woman show, and I'm going to remount that show. I do her and the great Lena Horne and Pearl Bailey, Eartha Kitt. I do the women that I love, that I ground my eye teeth on as I grew up. Those were the people that I admired so much.
And you met Maya Angelou in those early days.
She was in Porgy and Bess. Yes, yeah. She was a dancer.
I understand that Marlon Brando had a bet about your first name. Can you tell me about that?
Who did what?
Marlon Brando.
Oh, had a bet.
Yeah.
That my name wasn't Nichelle.
Right.
And I said, I'll take that bet. And so, I said, what will you bet? What do you bet? And he said, a half of a stove, or something like that. some crazy thing. I said, a half of a stove. He says, you don't think I'm going to bet money with you. and so I said, all right, you're on. And so finally, because I wasn't, he said, now I'm talking about you were born with. I said, you didn't say that. You said, I'll bet that's not your name, and your real name. And so I went home, and he said, you're crossing hairs with me. And I went to a toy store. How do you know about this? Why do you ask me about this? I went to a toy store, and I found an absolutely beautiful toy stove. And I went to somewhere, a shop, and had them cut it in half. And I packed it up. And I've forgotten that. I packed it up in a big box, lavish box, and I sent it to him on the set, and because I wanted people around it when he opened it, and he opened it. And they said he was in the dressing room, and he kept watching this. He was in a makeup room, and he kept watching this package and wondering what could possibly be in there, and what could I possibly be sending him. And he finally couldn't stand it any longer. He opened it up, and they say he almost fell off. He fell off the chair, that thing. It was kind of a high chair where they're making it up, and of the makeup chair. And he laughed. They said he laughed and he roared. And he invited me and Frank Silvera. At that time, I was engaged to Frank Silvera, and that's how I met him. And he invited us to dinner, and he brought the stove, and he said, think you're slick, don't you? I said, no, I always pay. And the card said, I always pay my debt. And I gave it to him. He says, now, what is your real name? And I said, that's my name, Nichelle. My mother named me. And I said, I have no duty to tell you what my name is. You just won the bet that wasn't my original name. Bingo. He said, touche, and he gave me a high five.
On Porgy and Bess, you were uncredited. You said you were a dancer on the film. Otto Preminger was the...
I was singer. I was in the chorus, and I was singing chorus and the dancing chorus. But you saw me dance. You heard me sing.
And Otto Preminger was the director?
Yes, yes.
What was he like to work for?
He was a crazy man. He wanted everything like he wanted it, and he had no concept of who or what black people were like. He had them go out and buy paper bags, brown paper bags with little, and he gave it to everybody to walk down the street. Number one, there was no such thing as a paper bag back when Porgy and Bess was the era. Mm-hmm. There was no such things, but you carried rag bags, you carried wrapped up. Women made their own bags, and we call them tote bags now. You pull them in a wagon, maybe if you were lucky enough to have a wagon, and so he had to be told that, and he was furious. He was just absolutely furious. He said, but everywhere I go, the black people always have women that have paper bags. He said, whether you know it or not, Mr. Preminger, so do white women in white neighborhoods. He said, but be that as it may, there were no paper bags in the era that Porgy and Bess was written in. He says, I want everybody off the stage who is not on the stage. And everybody who's on the crane that's not supposed to be on, that's not on the stage, get off. So we were in constant hysterics over the things that he was in. And we finally took him to task and asked to meet him and told him he could no longer treat Dorothy Dandridge and the manner that he treated her. He treated her terribly on the set. Dorothy, do this, Dorothy, and he would berate her. And we were sick and tired of it. And Portier and everyone in the major people in the cast.
And Pearl Bailey was in the cast too.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, darling. and that's where I met her, you know, and became so close to her. And they simply told him in very respectful terms that he could not do that it was demoralizing, that it was disrespectful, that she was, for whatever reasons, if he didn't like her acting, he should not have cast her, you know, but that we demanded respect for her. She was the only one who was not at the meeting. When she found out about it, she was in tears. She was so moved by it because she went around thinking nobody liked her, and it was just that everyone was uncomfortable around her. Why doesn't she call SAG and stop this nonsense? You can't treat people that way. Maybe 40 years ago you could, but not at that point in time, and certainly not in front of us. And she was very moved by that. She was very moved by that.
Was your first television appearance on the 1964 series called The Lieutenant?
That was my first guest star appearance on television, yes.
How did that role come about?
As I told you, I was engaged to the great actor Frank Silvera, and he had a playhouse in which he taught professionals and put on what was about to put him. He had a workshop, an actor's workshop, and a young man who worked for Gene Roddenberry on the series saw Don Marshall, who later went on to do Land of the Giants, and me do a scene for Frank's students, where we were working out as well, from A View from the Bridge. And he went back and told Gene, I've got the two black actors, the couple, that you want for the next series. Not for the next series, for the next episode.
Right.
And he said, where did you see them? He told him where, and he said, bring them in. He called Frank Silvera. Frank told us. We rehearsed it together. We did the scene that we had done, and the rest was history.
Gene Roddenberry produced the show. Did you meet him at that time?
Oh, absolutely. No, I didn't meet him at that time. He wasn't in the room when we did the interview, when we did the audition. If I had known it, I didn't know whether he was there or not, because it was 4 or 5 guys, watching. And before we got home, our agents were calling us, telling us we were hired. And then we had a night scene, and there was this creepy guy with a humpback and a overcoat and a long nose and and he kept leaning over my back, coming up behind me and leaning over me. And I turned up, and this creepy guy, and I said, I'm working, please. But I would try to be polite, because why would he be on the set if he... So I complained to the AD, and he says, oh, don't pay any attention to him. He drives everybody crazy. He's related to the producer, and friends. They've been lifelong friends. And I said, to Gene Roddenberry, where is he? Because I've never met him. And he said, he never comes on the set unless there's unless there's a problem. I said, well, we have a problem right now because his the cousin or whoever he is driving me nuts. And he said, well, we'll see what we can do about it. And then he came over to me. The crazy cousin or friend was Gene Roddenberry. He used to play jokes on people. He had this weird sense of humor. I almost punched him in the nose when he came and got too close to me. I said, look, you. And then I turned and looked at him, and Mr. Roddenberry! I could not believe, because he had pulled off some of the stuff and was a spitting image of a picture I'd seen of him. Up to that time, I hadn't met him.
What was that episode?
And then we became good friends for the rest of his life, you know.
What was that episode about of the lieutenant?
Oh, it was a wonderful story about two Marines who got called back from wherever they were stationed. Ours, Marshall, the role he played, we were up north. And we drove across, and they got reassigned to this little southern town on the Marine base, and the lieutenant there was Gary Lockwood. And they had to report to his office. And apparently they were selected because they were like the highest level of everybody he had selected them to come and to go on a special mission or do something, as I recall it. And my role, the role I played, she was in college, going about third year, and she takes off a year to be with, and she was going to marry this man and to be with him. So she takes off and drives across country to this with him, and the town happened to be where he was born. He didn't particularly want to go that, but he did not express to her why. And it was a small town in the South. He reports there, but it's his duty, and he reports there, and he goes into Lockwood's office, and he's standing and reports, and this other man, young man, is over there, and it's a white kid, and he reports, and he says something, do you know each other? And they turn to look at each other and walked over, went at each other and tried to kill each other. So the story was that they knew each other in this town when they were young kids. And what is his name? He played it. He passed away. Famous actor who played the role. It was in Crash. He had his own series. I know him so well. Anyway, I'll think of it. He had beat him up with gotten a bunch of his cronies, kids, and had beat him up and stole his bike from him. And he'd never forgotten a brand new bike that his father had saved up to buy for him for Christmas. It was my job in the role, in my role, to put him on the right track, that is not the way to go. She did not recognize this man. And it was a wonderful role that I had, and a marvelous role that he had. So
we're going to change tape.
Okay.